So my name is Rachel and I'm here today to talk about some mental health book recommendations. So this is part of kind of a series I want to do where I recommend some mental health books. I also want to do this with feminism books and LGBTQIAP+ books as well. That name gets longer every time. And I wanted to start today with mental health because that is something that I've always really enjoyed in literature since I sort of found it. So with this series I am going to bring up some books you will definitely have already heard of, as well as some that hopefully you won't have. And also I wanted to bring up some books that films were based off, because there are some films out there that, although are interesting and can be good, those films are not as good at exploring the mental health themes as their book counterparts. So I'm going to do 5 books per video just because I want to actually talk to you about these books and about why I think they are good, or why they represent mental illness, or just a little bit of background about them. So today is the first of the mental health recommendations videos, and yes, I'm going to be sharing 5 books with you today, so let's get started. The first book I wanted to mention was A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. And A Streetcar Named Desire was published in 1952 and won the Pulitzer Prize, which is awesome. Now, I encountered this book when I was at college. I think I was 17, and it was the first time that I fully encountered mental health in a book. So in terms of films, I had loved a lot of films with mental health stuff in them. I had had some mental health problems since I was around 13, and so when I started having those problems, I was looking for people like me in films, and so I watched things like Girl Interrupted, Fight Club, Shutter Island, like all the famous ones about mental illness, really. And then I went on to watching stuff like Cracked and 13 and things like that. But I never really read a lot of books about it because I just didn't really think to, which is a bit weird. But yes, this was my first big foray into literature about mental health, and it was a great place to start. So A Streetcar Named Desire is a play that recounts the story of Blanche Dubois, who is our main character, who has lost her family estate. I think it's called Bellerive, and she moves in with her sister Stella and her brother-in-law Stanley, and it is about their relationship together. It's a very contained novel. It all pretty much takes place in this little flat, and it's very stifling, and it's very much a character study, and it's fantastic. Within the story we see this sort of fight and collision between the fantasy and romanticisation and things like that Blanche has of life and of just everything, and then we see this clash with the realism of Stanley, and oh my god, the characters in this are so phenomenally written, and it's a very sad and harrowing story of mental illness, and definitely not a positive one. So if you want positive mental health stories, I wouldn't go for this one, but it is very, very amazingly interesting, and it also deals with a lot of themes of feminism in my eyes, which is brilliant. And yeah, I would highly recommend that play. My second recommendation is Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. Now, you probably would be aware of the film of Girl Interrupted, a very, very, very famous film with Angelina Jolie, Winona Ryder, Brittany Murphy, Whoopi Goldberg, that's it. And just so many people. Thingy Redgrave's in it. Vanessa Redgrave, is she called? It is just a tick-off list of famous actresses in Hollywood, and it is a good film, but it doesn't really explore mental illness in such a great light, especially when you have the memoir that it was based on by Susanna Kaysen, which really explores her personal journey through having a mental illness. So as I said, the original Girl Interrupted is a memoir that was published by Susanna Kaysen. It was published in 1993 and it retells her sort of story and her life whilst in the 1960s while she spent time in Maclean's psychiatric hospital. She found herself there because she had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and one of the most interesting things about this memoir to me was that she had with the help of lawyers, worked to get her file back from the hospital, the file of her the doctor's file on her during her suffering of this mental illness and her treatment. And that's a really, really interesting part of this memoir. She has photocopied and scanned a lot of the paperwork out of this file and put it into the book, and it is very, very interesting to read those documents on her mental illness, as well as her discussion of the documents and what the documents are actually saying. This memoir is not quite as negative and sort of sad as the film. The film isn't all sad, but there are definitely a lot of elements that have been very, very heavily dramatised. And when you read the book, there are a lot more happier endings and people really developing and learning to live with their mental illness, and it's a much happier story for me than the film is. But I would just give some trigger warnings for the book because there are some pretty harrowing scenes. I know for me personally, I've had self-harm issues in the past, and there is a scene where she is self-harming because of a delusion that she has, and that was quite difficult for me to read. It wasn't impossible, but yeah, if you have any sort of issue surrounding that, I would just be careful and be aware of the fact that that scene is in there and you might need to skip over it or whatever. But yes, Girl Interrupted is amazing and such a brilliant and honest story of Susanna Kaysen's time spent in a psychiatric hospital in the 60s. The third recommendation I wanted to give you today was The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Now, this is a short story that is absolutely oh my god, it is so fantastic, and just it's one of my favourite pieces of literature in the entire canon of literature. I adore this story. I think it's fantastic. It was published in 1892 in response to Charlotte Perkins Gilman had been suffering with, I think it was depression, and she went to a very, very popular and famous doctor at the time called Dr. S. Weir Mitchell, and he was very popular at the time for his creation of the rest cure. And this was basically where if there was anything wrong with women, if women had depression, if women had whatever, they would be told to have the treatment of the rest cure. And the rest cure was basically a way of just silencing women. Don't do any writing, don't do any thinking. Basically, it was just absolutely horrible. And after having this treatment, Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote The Yellow Wallpaper in response. Yellow Wallpaper features a protagonist who is being treated with the rest cure that has specifically been recommended to her by Dr. S. Weir Mitchell. She put his name in there to make sure people knew that this was slander against that guy, and I love her for that. As you would expect with the rest cure, it means that The Yellow Wallpaper explores how suppressing someone's nature and freedom and their very self can lead to their mental decline, and it is just absolutely beautiful and fantastic. It is also a very, very feminist short story, so if you are into that, pick it up also. And it is just Also, if you have not looked into Charlotte Perkins Gilman, you definitely should. If that story of her writing this short story in response wasn't enough to convince you, she started her own magazine/journal because people wouldn't publish her stuff because it was too controversial and radical. So she just started her own journal magazine and published everything she wanted to, which is amazing. she wrote a trilogy called the Herland Trilogy, which I want to read so much. I don't understand why I haven't read it yet. And in this trilogy, it is about a dystopian society where women, I think it's only women. The first one, I think, has men and women, then the second one has only women, and then it kind of criticises how we don't just need only women, we just need the two to be equal with each other. And then she has also wrote some essays. She wrote Women in Economics. She wrote The Man-Made World, which is all about how society is made with men in mind. She's just like amazing. You should look up Charlotte Perkins Gilman just as a person outside of her writing, because she is phenomenal and I'm in love with that woman. The next recommendation I wanted to give was Matthew Quick's Silver Linings Playbook. Obviously you've probably heard of Silver Linings Playbook because it was a very, very, very popular film a few years ago with Jennifer Lawrence and Robert De Niro, Bradley Cooper. Jennifer Lawrence won an Oscar for the film, like that's how far-reaching it was. However, I haven't seen many people talk about the book, and I watched the film and loved the film. I thought it was really good. I thought it was good that a film about mental illness was getting so much exposure, and I really enjoyed that. However, I went and did a representing mental illness in literature class at university, which was amazing, like one of my favourite classes I did at university, if not the best one. And we did the novel version of Silver Linings Playbook in that class, and the book is so much better, so much better in terms of exploring mental illness. The book was published in 2008, and one of the big differences is that there is a change of events, and about halfway through the novel to the end of the novel, there are some big changes made to the story that I don't think are as effective when it is a study of like mental illness and how mental illness affects people. I think with the film they went for an easier option that would be more dramatic and lead to a more romantic ending, whereas in the book it was a much more interesting story and series of events. I felt like you got a lot more from Pat and about Pat's mental illness. Pat is the protagonist in this book. The book follows him as he has just left a psychiatric hospital and is allowed to come home and live with his parents. He has been separated from his wife. His wife has a restraining order against him, and he can't remember any of the events that led to this restraining order or led to him being in a psychiatric hospital. And it is about him working on himself to try and get his wife back, but he doesn't really understand why she's not there. One of the most interesting themes in this book is the sort of low self-esteem, and that being something that's affecting a man, because low self-esteem is something we see in a lot of books, and we do see it affecting a lot of women. It usually tends to be women, but in this book we see Pat seeing himself as too big and wanting to look perfect for her, wanting to read books so he's intelligent enough because he feels like he is lacking in everything. And I really identified with his struggles with how he saw himself, and I thought that was amazing, and it was a shame that it wasn't put in the film adaptation. So yes, that is the next one I would recommend. The last one I'm going to recommend in this video is probably one that you were expecting when you clicked on this video, and it is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I literally couldn't make any sort of mental health recommendations video without mentioning this book at some point. It is a book that affected me so deeply and was just so important, and I think about it often. It is one of my favourite books of all time, and yeah, so it has to be talked about. This book was published in 1963, and it was published under the pseudonym of Victoria Lucas, although as we all know now, it was written by Sylvia Plath. This book is often referred to as semi-autobiographical, as it follows a protagonist, Esther Greenwood, who suffers with what many assume to be clinical depression, and this is what Sylvia Plath was thought to have suffered with during her life. And basically this book it focuses on a lot of confusions that Esther Greenwood has over her position in society and the expectations of society of her, and how she subverts them, and she wants to subvert them, but that subverting has such a negative impact on her. So in the book, you know, she wants to lose her virginity. She doesn't want to just get married and not be able to have a job afterwards. She just wants to do a lot of things that aren't acceptable for her because she is a woman. And again, massively feminist novel. It is very common to have feminist novels tie in with mental health novels, as when women aren't afforded the same rights as men, that can obviously have a very negative effect on their mental health, and that is usually the reason why those tie together so much. And The Bell Jar is just one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. Obviously it does discuss some very difficult topics, but she does it in such a just well described and fantastic way that it is just so beautiful. You can be reading about like the worst possible things, but you still can't help thinking, oh, that is gorgeous. Just her descriptions are just amazing, her metaphors. It is a phenomenal book that I really hope to reread soon. I haven't reread it since my first reading, and it is definitely something that I really want to do this year, hopefully. I will just say this book also has a trigger warning. I couldn't read some of it. We did it for a class, the representing mental illness class at university, and our teacher said it was fine if any of us felt triggered by anything to just skip some pages, and there was a page that I think I skipped 2 pages in it because it was just a bit too much for me to read, and that was due to the self-harm problems I'd had in the past. It was a very similar topic. There are instances of suicidal thoughts in this book and attempts at suicide as well. So yeah, it's a hard book, and I'm like not going to sugarcoat it. It is one of the hardest books to read if you have had any of those problems, because she writes it in such a real way that it is actually quite difficult. But I found that because of this, the book just resonated with me so much, and yeah, I adore it. It's one of the best books of all time, in my opinion, and probably the best mental illness book that I have read so far. So they were my mental health recommendations. This is a part 1 video, and I am hoping to make some more of these. So yes, thank you very much for watching. If you have any mental health recommendations for me, please leave them in the comments down below, because I am always open to read more books about mental health. I will see you in my next video. Bye!